The council chamber was filled with a sense of smug finality, as the alien delegates leaned back in their seats, satisfied with the decision they were about to enshrine into law. For years, whispers had grown into murmurs, and murmurs into formal complaints about humanity's place among them. They called the Terrans unpredictable, too emotionally volatile, too willing to escalate when reason might serve. Yet beneath the carefully prepared speeches and the polished condemnations, the truth was simpler. Many species had grown fearful of humanity's rapid rise. Humanity had learned too quickly, adapted too thoroughly, and built alliances that reached deeper than anyone expected. The council had grown tired of living in their shadow. Speaker after speaker repeated the same arguments, cloaking fear as reason. They spoke of instability and recklessness, as though the record did not show that it was human fleets that had arrived first whenever a border colony was threatened, human engineers who devised the power relays that half the council now depended on, human mediators who endured sleepless nights to calm disputes before they spilled into war. None of that mattered now. What mattered was appearances, and appearances demanded action. Expelling humanity would prove that the council was united, decisive, and immune to intimidation. That was the illusion they clung to. The human envoy sat at the edge of the circle, expression unreadable, posture unflinching. They did not interrupt, did not argue, did not plead. They let the words wash over them like a tide of condescension, every insult disguised as diplomacy, every slur dressed as a warning. This silence unsettled some of the delegates more than they would admit. They had expected outrage, expected fiery resistance. Instead, they faced the quiet dignity of someone who already knew how the story would end. When the vote was finally called, the result was a foregone conclusion. One by one, representatives cast their support for expulsion. Only a handful abstained, unwilling to go on record but too timid to oppose the majority. As the final tally appeared above the chamber, the decision was sealed. Humanity was no longer a member of the Galactic Council. The chamber erupted in murmurs of self-congratulation, as though they had averted some grand catastrophe by removing the species they had come to fear most. Then, at last, the human envoy stood. Their voice was calm, almost conversational, yet the words carried an unmistakable weight. They thanked the Council for its years of cooperation, acknowledged the difficulties of interspecies politics, and spoke with an almost disarming civility. But beneath the courtesy, there was steel. They did not beg for reconsideration or threaten retaliation. They merely promised that humanity would respect the will of the Council and withdraw from every obligation, every treaty, every station. Then came the part that lingered in the minds of every being present long after. You believe our absence will grant you peace. You will learn instead what absence means. The words were not shouted. They were not embellished with gestures or dramatics. They were delivered as fact, without malice, without boast. And perhaps it was that restraint that made them echo louder than any threat could. The envoy turned, leaving the chamber without another glance, boots striking the polished floor in a rhythm that felt like a countdown. The council erupted again, but this time in uneasy laughter. Some mocked the envoy's melodramatic tone, others dismissed the warning as arrogance. A few, though, sat in silence, chilled by the weight of what had just been said. Yet none spoke up. To do so would be to admit doubt, and doubt was weakness. Instead, they congratulated themselves again, declaring that the galaxy was safer, freer, more balanced without humanity's looming presence. No one noticed how quickly the chamber's warmth faded once the human was gone. It was as if the very air grew colder, though the climate controls hummed on unchanged. Delegates returned to their private quarters convinced they had accomplished something historic, yet beneath the triumph lingered something unspoken. For all their arrogance, not one of them could shake the feeling that in casting humanity aside, they had set something in motion that none of them truly understood. Humanity's withdrawal began without ceremony. There were no protests in the halls of power, no desperate pleas to remain. Instead, orders rippled through their fleets and colonies with precise efficiency. Starships disengaged from patrol routes and formed convoys, entire task forces reorienting as though the plan had been rehearsed for years. Colonies once buzzing with commerce shuttered their trade hubs, ports that had welcomed millions falling silent overnight. Diplomatic envoys departed without lingering farewells, carrying themselves with the same calm resolve as their representative who had spoken in the chamber. There was no bitterness, no open defiance. There was only a quiet, deliberate severing of ties. For those who had grown accustomed to humanity's constant presence, the change was immediate and unsettling. Alien merchants who relied on human freighters to haul cargo across dangerous sectors found schedules unraveling. Trade lanes once under human oversight grew erratic as shipments delayed or disappeared entirely. Council border stations, long accustomed to the steady rhythm of human patrols sweeping by, reported stretches of emptiness that felt unnatural. Entire regions that had seemed secure now appeared exposed, their silence heavy with implications no one wanted to voice. On worlds where humans had been a visible part of daily life, the absence was even more jarring. Factories designed around human-engineered machinery shut down when their technicians left. Hospitals found themselves without crucial pharmaceuticals only humans produced at scale. Colonies that had flourished under joint stewardship faltered as infrastructure suddenly lacked the hands that kept it reliable. Even small things, unnoticed until gone, left an ache: the abrupt end of cultural exchanges, the missing sound of human music in alien plazas, the loss of laughter from human children in mixed schools. These details spread quickly through rumor networks, spoken with unease that was rarely admitted aloud. Council leaders worked to control the narrative. Press releases assured populations that nothing critical would falter, that other species would step into the roles humanity had abandoned. They painted humanity's exit as inconsequential, an adjustment period at most. Yet beneath the polished announcements, administrators scrambled. Sectors dependent on human technology faced cascading failures. Replacement systems proved incompatible, or else required expertise only human engineers had mastered. Even military strategists quietly admitted that human withdrawal created voids no other fleet could fill. Ordinary citizens noticed the silence most keenly. In the outer colonies, where danger often pressed nearest, the sudden disappearance of human ships sparked whispered fears. Pirates and raiders, long kept at bay by the simple knowledge that Terran vessels prowled the routes, began testing boundaries. Local defenses sent urgent requests for reinforcements, but those reinforcements arrived late, undermanned, and poorly coordinated. Refugees told stories of near misses that once would have been unthinkable, of skirmishes that grew bolder by the week. Alien diplomats who had once treated humans with suspicion now found themselves unsettled by their departure. Several admitted privately that the restraint of their exit was unnerving. If humanity had left in anger, with fire and threats, the Council could have dismissed it as typical Terran aggression. But leaving quietly, with dignity, sent a different message altogether. It suggested preparation. It suggested confidence. It suggested that humanity had weighed the consequences and chosen to accept them, something that gnawed at even the most arrogant counselors. Still, no one dared raise the alarm openly. To do so would invite ridicule, an accusation of weakness. And so, the silence deepened. The Council carried on its daily business, issuing decrees and debating trade disputes, even as the gaps widened around them. In the chambers of power, they convinced themselves the galaxy was moving forward unimpeded. But in the markets, the colonies, and the border sectors, an unease settled in like frost creeping over glass. One ambassador, speaking in hushed tones to a colleague, captured what many were thinking but few voiced. "It is as though a star has gone dark. We grew so used to its light that we never considered the cold it kept away." Those words spread, carried in whispers and reports, reshaped but never forgotten. They reflected a dawning realization that the absence of humanity was not merely a matter of politics or pride. It was a shift in the very balance of the galaxy, one that none yet fully understood, but all had begun to feel. The first signs of strain appeared in subtle ways, small disruptions that most officials dismissed as temporary. Freight lanes slowed as substitute carriers attempted to cover the massive void left behind, but inefficiency bred backlog, and backlog bred scarcity. Goods that once arrived with clockwork regularity now vanished from markets. Energy regulators discovered that stabilizers based on human design could not be maintained without the engineers who understood their intricacies. Colonies relying on those systems experienced blackouts, followed by cascading failures that left populations vulnerable. Governments issued statements promising rapid resolution, yet every promise seemed thinner than the one before it. As shortages grew, so did resentment. Citizens who had once cheered the decision to expel humanity began questioning whether the council had acted in haste. Local leaders reported protests sparked not by politics but by empty shelves and failing medicine supplies. Factories idled, starports filled with stranded vessels, and commercial alliances strained under pressure they had not been built to endure. At first, these issues were framed as isolated setbacks. Within months, however, the pattern was undeniable. Humanity's absence was no longer a political gesture. It was a structural wound spreading through the arteries of galactic civilization. The military collapse came next. Patrols once guided by human coordination floundered in the void. Human fleets had not only enforced boundaries, they had also shared tactical systems, doctrines, and supply networks. Without them, other species tried to improvise, but improvisation revealed weaknesses. Fleets moved too slowly, communication broke down under stress, and outlying sectors became fertile hunting grounds for raiders. Convoys, once untouchable, were intercepted with alarming frequency. Each failure emboldened predators who had long feared retribution. Where humans once deterred conflict through certainty, the Council now projected hesitation, and hesitation invited attack. Within the Council itself, tempers frayed. Accusations flew across the chamber, each delegate eager to deflect responsibility. One species blamed another for failing to increase production, another accused its neighbor of withholding technology. The unspoken truth, that every power had relied on humanity's capacity to shoulder burdens none of them wished to bear, was never admitted openly, but it hung over every debate. Frustration turned to panic when proposals to replicate human innovations fell short. Engineers discovered that designs humans had shared contained subtleties no one else fully grasped, as though humanity's very approach to problem-solving resisted imitation. It was not sabotage, but the natural result of minds that thrived in chaos and adapted through trial in ways others could not replicate. On the frontier, unrest reached dangerous levels. Colonists who had once sworn loyalty to the Council began speaking openly of betrayal. They had trusted that expelling humanity would not affect their safety, yet it was their homes now left vulnerable. Some settlements turned inward, refusing to pay levies or send resources to the core. Others looked to mercenary bands, desperate for protection, trading long-term security for immediate survival. This fragmentation spread through whispers and rumors, eroding the illusion of unity that the Council had worked so hard to project. Even within species that had supported the expulsion most strongly, doubt crept in. The stories filtering back from the outer systems were too numerous to dismiss. Testimonies of lives saved by humans in the past circulated alongside accounts of what was happening in their absence. Politicians attempted to spin narratives of resilience, yet their words rang hollow against the stark evidence of decay. Entire sectors, once stable, now operated on the edge of collapse. The final blow to complacency came when financial networks began to unravel. Human banks had been interwoven with galactic trade in ways few realized until they were gone. Currency fluctuations destabilized economies, and trade pacts dissolved under the weight of mistrust. Species that once prided themselves on efficiency found their systems grinding to a halt without the stabilizing influence of Terran reliability. The Council convened emergency sessions, but each meeting ended in shouting, resolutions drowned by bickering and denial. Through it all, one truth became undeniable: the galaxy had mistaken humanity's contributions as mere participation. They had not understood that humans had become the glue binding everything together. Without that glue, cracks became fractures, and fractures widened into chasms. In their eagerness to be rid of what they feared, the Council had stripped away the very foundation on which their fragile order rested. By the time they recognized this, the damage had already spread too far to reverse. The predators had always lingered at the edges, watching and waiting. For generations, they had tested the boundaries of Council space and been driven back with uncompromising efficiency. It was humanity that had made those boundaries feel impenetrable. Their fleets had patrolled relentlessly, their tactics unpredictable, their willingness to escalate unmatched. Raiders learned quickly that Terran intervention meant certain defeat. But now the patrols were gone, and the deterrent with them. What had been unthinkable only a cycle ago became an opportunity too tempting to ignore. The first incursions were small. A convoy stripped of cargo, a mining station assaulted before reinforcements could arrive. These events would once have been footnotes, resolved before panic spread. Now they grew into headlines, repeated across systems desperate for stability. The Council assured its citizens that these attacks were anomalies, handled swiftly. Yet even as statements were issued, new reports arrived of bolder strikes. Fleets that had once hidden in shadow now operated openly, carving into border territories. Entire systems fell silent, their communications jammed, their outposts left smoldering. Refugees began to appear in numbers that could not be ignored, carrying with them stories of slaughter and fire. Council fleets responded, but their movements betrayed inexperience. Without the guiding doctrines of Terran officers, coordination faltered. Vessels arrived too late, or arrived without the numbers to make a difference. Predators exploited every hesitation, retreating only to reappear elsewhere. It became a war of attrition, and the Council was losing ground it could not afford. The realization spread like a sickness: without humanity, the galaxy was prey again. The economic toll magnified the devastation. Trade networks collapsed under the pressure of piracy. Worlds that had once thrived on the constant flow of goods now suffered shortages so severe that unrest boiled into open defiance. Smuggling cartels filled the void, selling survival at extortionate prices, further undermining Council authority. The predators fed not only on territory but on fear, using panic itself as a weapon. Each attack spread instability, convincing more species that the Council could no longer protect them. Diplomats who had once scoffed at Terran warnings now found themselves invoking their names in desperation. In private discussions, leaders admitted that humanity had not merely been another member of the Alliance. They had been the shield no one else had the will to raise. The strength of the Council had been an illusion, and its fragility was now laid bare. Yet pride prevented these admissions from becoming public. To confess error was to invite chaos, and chaos was already too near. As the predators pressed deeper, desperation began to fracture even the Council's core. Some species called for immediate negotiations with the raiders, offering tribute to secure their borders. Others demanded harsher reprisals, insisting that weakness only encouraged further assaults. The chamber devolved into shouting, every delegate more concerned with their own survival than the survival of the whole. Accusations of betrayal filled the air. Long-standing rivalries resurfaced, consuming the time that should have been spent on strategy. Meanwhile, the refugees poured in, millions displaced from colonies that had once trusted in the Council's protection. Their stories painted a picture more terrifying than the statistics. Families torn apart, defenses obliterated in hours, enemies advancing with a ruthlessness few had encountered before. Again and again, survivors repeated the same refrain. When the humans were here, this never happened. The weight of those words could not be ignored, even by the most arrogant officials. They struck at the heart of the Council's decision, turning it from a political maneuver into an accusation of negligence. Still, no one dared propose the obvious solution aloud. To ask for humanity's return was to admit that the Council had been wrong, and that admission was more than their pride could bear. So they clung to failing strategies, convincing themselves they could endure a storm that was already consuming them. Every system lost made it clearer. Every defeat reinforced the truth no one wanted to face. The predators had not grown stronger, the Council had grown weaker. And the weakness was entirely self-inflicted. What had begun as arrogance had ripened into catastrophe, and it was only a matter of time before the entire galaxy paid the price for their decision. Collapse came faster than the Council could comprehend. What had begun as scattered raids evolved into coordinated campaigns, pressing deeper into sectors once thought unassailable. Entire defense lines crumbled, their fall traced not to overwhelming force but to the absence of the one species that had held the galaxy together by sheer will. The predators did not conquer alone, chaos itself became their ally. Trade routes splintered, allies turned inward, and trust among member species evaporated. For the first time in centuries, the Council no longer appeared as a stabilizing force but as a hollow institution unable to defend even its heart. Desperation broke through pride. Envoys were dispatched under the cover of secrecy, slipping away from devastated systems to seek humanity. Some arrived on Terran borders, bearing gifts and apologies dressed in diplomatic language. They pleaded for patrols to return, for fleets to stabilize the chaos, for the engineers who could restart broken systems. Their requests were received with courtesy, but not acceptance. The humans listened, recorded every word, and answered with the same calm restraint they had shown when they departed. They reminded the envoys of the Council's decision, of the speeches that painted them as reckless interlopers. Humanity had been told clearly that they did not belong, and they had taken those words to heart. In the galactic core, whispers grew louder. Citizens who once cheered humanity's removal now demanded their return, chanting outside council halls, accusing leaders of arrogance and blindness. Refugees carried stories of worlds that might have survived if humans had stood beside them. Every tale sharpened the memory of the envoy's warning, replayed now as prophecy. You will learn what absence means. The council's chambers, once filled with derision at those words, now echoed with silence whenever they were recalled. Panic shifted to resignation. Leaders began to calculate not how to restore order but how to endure the collapse. Proposals emerged to fragment the council into regional powers, each guarding its own borders with whatever resources remained. Others suggested full capitulation to the raiders, exchanging sovereignty for survival. None offered hope, only temporary measures to delay the inevitable. What once stood as a unified front now resembled a gathering of fractured voices, unable to rally behind anything greater than their own fear. From a distance, humanity watched. Their colonies flourished in silence, supply lines strong, fleets drilling with precision. They had not withdrawn into weakness but into self-reliance, building what others had taken for granted. They did not interfere, did not exploit the chaos, did not revel in revenge. Their silence spoke louder than any declaration of power. It was a silence that revealed just how much the galaxy had depended on them, and just how little the Council had appreciated that dependence until it was gone. Occasionally, an alien voice would break through the clamor, begging not for fleets or aid but for forgiveness. They asked why humanity could not see the suffering and return for the sake of compassion. The replies were always the same, measured, polite, resolute. Humanity had no wish to dominate, no interest in humiliation, but neither would they return to serve those who had cast them aside in scorn. They would not be pawns in a council that had never respected them, nor would they risk their people for the pride of others. The galaxy spiraled further, each crisis compounding the last, until even the most stubborn leaders admitted, if only in private, that their greatest mistake had not been underestimating humanity's strength but misunderstanding their role. Humanity had not been a tool or a weapon to wield, but the foundation upon which everything balanced. Without that foundation, everything crumbled. In the end, no grand declaration marked the lesson learned. No council vote restored what was lost. There was only silence in chambers that had once roared with arrogance, silence heavy with regret too deep to voice. The truth was inescapable, carved into every fallen world, every fractured alliance, every desperate plea left unanswered. Humanity had not left in anger, they had simply obeyed the will of those who claimed to know better. And when they were gone, the galaxy discovered too late the cost of mistaking strength for danger and loyalty for threat. It was only in their absence that the Council finally understood the truth. The galaxy had never been safer because humanity was restrained, it had been safer because humanity was there. And now, with that truth undeniable, all that remained was regret, sharp, bitter, and unending.